Welcome to Asake Online. My name is Brighton Ncube. The show is called Know Your Right, a show that seeks to look at the Zimbabwean Constitution as well as the Bill of Rights. Today on the show, I'm joined by Prisca Dube from Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. We want to tackle the issue of right to education in Zimbabwe and the state of preparedness for our schools as they open in Zimbabwe. Ma'am, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. So let's start by looking at Section 775 of Zimbabwe's Constitution, right to education. It says every citizen of Zimbabwe has a right to basic state-funded education. What does that mean?
Right. Before I get into that, I want us to understand why we should all be concerned about the right to education. The basic principle is that education in itself, it is a right. So at the same time, the right to education enables one to then enjoy other rights. So you find that the right to education is an end in itself and a means of enjoying other rights. So that is why when we then enshrine it in constitutions, as we did in 2013, the state as a duty bearer has a duty to make sure that this right is available to everyone. What do we mean by a state education? We mean that, remember, we have private schools in Zimbabwe. Those are provided for in terms of Section 75, subsection 4, where they are running a business of availing an education to the public that can pay. But in terms of Section 75(1), a basic state education, basic state-funded education means that it's an education from ECD, and in terms of our definition in Zimbabwe, up to O level. Any child between those states of needing an education from ECD up to O level must have an education, whether the parents can afford or not, because the state must make sure it is available and children go to school.
Right. If I move on further, there it says every person has a right to establish and maintain their own at their own expense an independent institution like private schools. But however, a few weeks ago, we saw private schools are demanding to have their own calendar, their own school's calendar in Zimbabwe. What's your take on that? Having a public school's calendar as well as a private school's calendar. What does it say about our education in Zimbabwe?
No, it will bring a lot of confusion. For me, I do appreciate that private schools, private institutions have been having online lessons. That is acceptable. But the minute that government publicized a national calendar for all schools, at least they then should have given their students a break so that they will also open when other children are opening, so that we have this kind of sameness when it comes to education. Remember, as I said, the right to education is an end in itself and a means to enjoying other rights. So if we start creating disparities in terms of haves and haves not, then we'll have a problem. So one of the ways in ensuring that education at least seems to be equal to everyone is for us to have some semblance of uniform, even in terms of when our schools are operational.
Right. So now schools opened last week. The those were writing exam classes opened last week, and today non-examination schools classes are opening today. What are some of the human rights expectations or standards that we would like to schools to set as you open in the midst of COVID-19?
You see, Brighton, COVID-19 has revealed a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of challenges that the education sector has had. Remember when we opened after long lockdowns in 2020, teachers went on industrial action. And then now we are opening again. There is this rumor again that they might be going on another industrial action. But when we are looking at the human rights aspect on the right to education, there are certain things that just have to be in place. We know that in terms of the World Health Organization guidelines, all children will have to sanitize, they'll have to have masks, they'll have to be social distancing. But I'm asking myself, those that are already in schools, they're in the back of beyond, where they are using mud huts or they are learning under classrooms and under trees as classrooms. And even those that are in the urban areas where we used to have hot sitting, what is supposed to happen? Because remember, even the rooms that they're using in terms of the World Health Organization guidelines, they're only supposed to be confined to certain spaces for a certain period of time. So now if you're getting into class at 7:30 in the morning, getting out at lunch, and there are others who are coming in at 12:30, getting out at 5:15 or thereabouts, which used to be the case when I was still at school in Popoma High. How about the fumigation of classes? And then those who are coming from challenged backgrounds, impoverished backgrounds, how are they going to make sure that they have adequate masks? Because a mask is not something that you can wear for the whole day. You need to change it after certain hours because it starts to be funky there in behind the mask, number one. Number two, and in terms of sanitization, those schools that are in places where there are challenges of water and issues like that, how are the students going to be able to wash their hands and sanitize properly? So these are some of the things that government should have taken into consideration and worked hard to make sure that they've put them in place to make sure that when we are opening now, all the children will be safe.
Well, speaking of the availability of PPEs, let's talk about schools that are located in the rural areas of Zimbabwe, deep rural areas of Zimbabwe. Do you think parents have the capacity to buy PPEs for their children?
Not at all. The parents would not have the capacity. The mothers might try to sew masks here and there, but the other things like sanitizers, like fumigations of the rooms, that should squarely fall on the shoulders of government itself. And I don't know whether we should have created an all stakeholders kind of committee that will at least inspect and see that indeed our schools are adhering to World Health Organization guidelines. Maybe the saving grace will be that what has come out from the research around COVID, that those children might be affected and be carriers of COVID, they themselves do not suffer much, but that should not be an excuse in terms of exposing children. Yes, they do have to be in school because they have a right to education, but once they are carriers of COVID, they might bring it at home and then infect those who have underlying conditions, and then we'll be in a lot of mess as a country.
Earlier on, we spoke about the issue of e-learning. There are schools which are located in the remote areas of Zimbabwe. They don't have internet connectivity in those schools. Also, the issue of the price of data. So what can you say about those who are doing e-learning and those who can't afford e-learning in terms of the right to education?
If I'm getting you correct, and I think I am, the issue of IT access should have been one of those considerations in terms of how do we avail free internet in schools and other resources in terms of those schools where there is no electricity. What other mediums should have been in place? Because remember, the most unfortunate thing is that those schools that tend not to have electricity or internet access are the very same schools where radio programs or TV programs cannot be accessed by those students. So we should have found a way of developing, I don't know whether we call them cluster IT centers for these students, so that at least if we can develop maybe cassettes or some other old tech technology that we could use. You remember those solar charged radios that once caused such a mayhem across the country in terms of the politics of the country, but those could have come in handy when now we're looking at the right to education, so that at least village-based or certain homestead-based students will have those radios, and then they were given cassettes, pre-recorded cassettes with work that they would be doing. This would have adequately bridged the gap between the haves and the haves not, and also the issues of electricity, cost of data, and the distances that children now are traveling. Because in essence, students who are in the rural areas have lost literally a year of education. But most of the children in town who are in private schools or other schools have been learning and actually are so far ahead. They could even write exams today and pass. But their compatriots in the rural areas have lost a year. And we need as a country to really start asking ourselves, the pandemic has shown us this challenge. How do we move forward? More so when we consider that Section 75 Brighton does not guarantee a right to education in one's mother language. For me, that is a fundamental defect of our constitution. Because for me to access education, one of the things that will make education accessible to me is the language of of how this education gets to me. And if the language of how the education gets to me is my mother language, then education can be accessible. This is the reason why you find United Nations itself realized this shortfall, and they have declared 2022 to 2032 the decade of languages, multilingualism and culture, so that we go back into our mother languages, because so many languages are being lost each year. And in losing languages, people are also losing the right to education in a language that they are comfortable in before they transit and move on to other foreign languages, which are the languages of impacting education in schools.
Also, let's look at the issue of opening schools during COVID-19. Full school fees is wanted by the schools, but parents have not been working because of the full lockdown which was implemented in Zimbabwe. As a parent, how do you react to these things? Schools are now opening, they demand the full school fees, but however, there's been no income for parents. How do you react to that?
You see, the unfortunate thing about the right to education, this right inherently belongs to every child. And those adults who want basic education also have a right to education. But by large, the right belongs strictly to the child. This is why you find that as a duty bearer, the school then has no right to chase away a child for non-payment of fees, or to withhold results, or to chase away a child on the basis of their freedom of conscience if they're into Rastafarism and other religions, and say, because this is a school and here at the school we cut hair and do things like that. So now when we look at the issue of payment of school fees unfortunately have to be paid because parents have a duty to pay those fees. But if parents are genuinely failing to pay fees, that duty goes back to the duty bearer, the foremost duty bearer being the state itself. This is why we should have started thinking hard to say, if children are at home and 90 or so % of our population are people who are informally employed, and once schools are opening and schools will demand school fees, where are these parents going to get the school fees? Then we should have budgeted in the 2020 budget, made sure that our BEAM budget is extended even by 100 or more %. Similarly, Brighton, for me, who is a mother of girl children, issues of sanitary wear go hand in glove with issues of demanding school fees. Because when these girls go to school, they'll need sanitary wear, which has become so expensive. Remember, in the 2019 budget, we had actually budgeted a lot, about 200 million, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for it to go towards procurement of sanitary wear, which was meant to be distributed in schools in 2020. And then in March, schools closed. And no one has tracked to say what happened to that money that was budgeted for sanitary wear. Did we procure it? Is it going to be distributed to girls so that it lessens the burden on parents who are already struggling to pay school fees? If we did not, can that money be regimented and go towards BEAM so that we then can assist more parents in terms of ensuring that their children have their fees paid? And also, in addition to school fees, the government has a duty to make sure that these children are also fed. Remember, we had a feeding program. Is that feeding program going to be in place? Because over and above the PPE, the paying of school fees, some of these children are hungry children, and nothing is going to get in if we do not resuscitate the feeding programs, so that we give a holistic kind of attitude towards our children and show them that education is important and we care about them.
Right, late last year when schools opened in Zimbabwe, we saw many students getting testing positive for COVID-19. But now we're opening schools again. Everyone's going back to school today. The non-writing exams are going back to school, and also last week others went back to school. Are we not putting our children's life at risk by saying everyone must go back to school? Are we ready as a country? Are we ready in terms of providing PPEs, also abiding by the WHO COVID-19 regulations?
I'm not sure whether as a country will ever be ready, because this pandemic literally has shown the world flames in terms of how prepared as a globe we have been in dealing with such pandemics. And I feel that though we do not really call for children to be tested and to be vaccinated as much as people who are above certain ages and those with underlying conditions. We need to really be putting a robust approach in terms of dealing with these issues. Particularly, remember, these children are going to interface with teachers, and some of the teachers have not yet been vaccinated. Not only are they going to interface with teachers, our education system needs now to use this pandemic as a springboard in terms of how do we make our education more holistic. It has shown that there is need for each and every school, not only to have teachers, but to have somebody who is medically trained in some way to be part and parcel of the school personnel. And we are not yet at that level. But this pandemic, because I don't see it going away anytime soon, except by some miracle. But if it's going to be around, just like we have had to adapt to HIV, flu, and other influenzas and things like that, we need to make sure that our education setups, our children are safe, so that when they come out of the school setup, they do not then transmit other things that they would have gotten from others to the wider community. And then we are forced to go into another lockdown, which will be even be worse, considering that we'll be going towards winter and people will be needing warmer clothes, warmer food, lots of food, and heating, which are things that people cannot afford because those things demand money.
So in your own view, what can be done by the government to provide a safe space for students going back to school in the midst of COVID-19?
In my view, because parents are buying uniforms, can government at least avail masks that are school coordinated, color coordinated with the uniforms of the schools? Can they also provide adequate PPE material for the teachers? Those teachers that are willing to be vaccinated, can they be vaccinated as frontline workers as fast as possible? Those students who are still in the school system, 17 plus going on, who also want to be vaccinated, can they also be vaccinated? Can we scale up in terms of testing? Can we then also relook our classroom setups in terms of how do we make IT part and parcel of the education system? This is very imperative, Brighton, particularly if you consider that in 2021, this year, the current grade 7s are going to be the first class that will be tested on 6 subjects, and the 6th subject has a component of IT. How is somebody in Madlambuz, in Dadamjena, in Cholocho, in Dlakapia, in Kachana, Lupane, going to write an exam paper on IT when they've never seen a laptop or a computer, and the teacher themselves who is teaching them on these things is just seeing a picture on the textbook, and he or she is the only one with that particular textbook? It's like an insult on the intelligence of our children. And then when we get shocking results, we say these children are dull or something, when we as a country would have failed them. Let's look at our education system and realize that education is a right in itself, and it is a means of achieving other rights. And therefore, it must be given that critical look and be properly financed so that we can move on and develop as a country.
Also, there was a debate on the issue of terms. Now we have 3 terms in Zimbabwe. Some were saying let's have 2 terms because of COVID-19. Why are we having 3 terms instead of 2 terms? What's your reaction on that, on the issue of terms?
I suppose the issue of how many terms we have has always been dependent on the type of economy that we have. We've always been an agro-based kind of economy, and you'll find that we'll need our children at home, particularly in the months of April when we are doing our harvesting, in the months of August when we are fertilizing the fields, and things like that, in the month of December when we are plowing. So there has always been that link in terms of the type of economy that we are. Yes, some might advocate for 2 terms, and then it could also work. But let's have that robust, healthy conversation on why you're saying 2 terms and why we are still stuck on the 3 terms, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we are still an agro-based kind of economy in Zimbabwe, and the largest population of our people are still living in the rural areas, and they are still dependent on subsistence farming, and they will need their children to assist them and them inculcate those skills into their children so that we continue as a country.
Lastly, Prisca, our constitution is said to be the best constitution. It's a well-written constitution that was adopted in 2018. What's in your heart in terms of the constitution of Zimbabwe?
I don't want this constitution to continue to gather dust. It is gathering enough dust as it is right now. Because for me, we cannot continue in 2021, 8 years later, to be calling it a new constitution. It is not a new constitution. We should be calling it now a working constitution, where we would have aligned other laws with this constitution. First and foremost, in terms of guaranteeing language, particularly choice of mother language, is a right that is linked to the right to education. Also, making sure that those aspirational aspects of the constitution, where we are speaking of 16 languages being official languages, are tied to the enshrined rights under chapter 4 of the constitution, to make these rights actually something that realistically can reach people, realistically can be promoted and defended by the people. And for me, can we all work towards making sure that it stops being just black and white in paper, it becomes lived realities of the people. It is very saddening when you go deep in the communities, in the rural areas, and you show them a copy of the constitution, and they'll be like, oh, so this is what it is, because they have never seen it. They last saw us there deep in the back of beyond doing the COPAC outreach, asking for their input into the constitution, but we then never went back and showed them the actual product, what came out.
Right, Prisca, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, and goodbye.
Right, there we have, you've been watching Know Your Right, a show that seeks to look at the Zimbabwean constitution as well as the Bill of Rights. This is Asake Online. Till next time, please do follow us on Twitter @ZW. Do follow me on Twitter @TheRealPlayFactor. Till next time, #Know Your Right.